In this section of the module, we're going to be learning about dependency support and independence ignore scripts. As we talked about in the slide about person-environment fit theory, the social environment can either encourage or discourage independence, depending upon the press on a person, right? So again, we talked about an environment that is too demanding as being overwhelming to a person and causing a problem with well-being, but an environment that isn't demanding enough, right? An environment where too much is done for the person can actually have the effect of discouraging independence and making the person more dependent than they have to be. So how does this happen, right? We think, well, gosh, family and caregivers want what's best for an elder. They want them to have a happy and comfortable life. Well, doing too much for the older person, or the flip side, ignoring the older person at times when we shouldn't be, all of those things can inadvertently, meaning not intentionally, not with a bad intent, but it can contribute to greater dependence, to dependent behaviors, to the older adult not doing enough to meet their full potential and becoming more frail as a result. So well-meaning efforts to help may actually upset person-environment congruence, right? If we do too much for the older person and they're not allowed to do anything for themselves, they become weaker and they become more dependent instead of healthier and more active. So our actions lead to reactions based on what we expect of the older adult. Same with kids, right? If you do everything for a kid, they don't learn to do things for themselves. Older adults learned that already, but if you start doing everything for them, they start to think, well, gosh, I guess I can't do things for myself anymore, and they become more dependent. And so when our actions lead to a reaction based on our expectations with the other person, these interaction patterns are called scripts, right? Just like for a play, you follow or a movie, you follow the script, and the script sort of writes down what each person says, and the action is laid out based upon those interactions in the script. So too, when we have a certain action or a certain treatment of a person, we get a response that's kind of almost automatic. And so we call those interaction patterns scripts. So the first negative script that Margaret Baltus identified was the dependency support script. So in other words, an interaction that family members and friends have with or professional caregivers have with an older adult that leads to greater dependent behavior. And this happens when the older person's dependent behaviors are attended to immediately when people interact with older adults. So in other words, we're reinforcing dependent behaviors. Let me give you an example. Grandma's not feeling well, and she calls up and said, oh, I'm feeling sick, will you come over? The person comes over right away. Now, you might think, well, that's a good thing. It's good to come over right away when grandma's sick. But if that's the only time we're coming over, eventually grandma's almost motivated to be more dependent and needy in order to get that attention and interaction from the people around her. And the flip side of the dependency support script is the independence ignore script. When people interact with older adults, independent behaviors are mostly ignored, right? So if grandma's going about her business and doing her own shopping, maybe we don't feel the need to go over there quite so often. So if we're ignoring independent behaviors and we're reinforcing dependent behaviors, what's the message? If I want people to pay attention to me, I've got to become more dependent. And it's not like people sit and think about this and are plotting to seem more dependent so that you pay more attention to them. But subtly, you're sending a message and you're reinforcing less independence, which is ultimately not healthy for an older person, right? We need some environmental press. We need the environment to push us a little bit in order to stay active. So caregivers' behavior can actually decrease functioning. Notice how the sequences reinforce dependent behavior at the expense of independent behavior, regardless of the older person's competencies. And some families take this further. They think that, well, you've worked all your life and you helped me, so now I'm going to help you. If an older person or a person with disabilities is saying to you, no, I can do it myself, let them. They're telling you something. They're saying, I want to do this myself, right? A person needs a little bit of challenge in their life. So you don't want to completely take over for the older person and reinforce dependence at the expense of independence, right? You want to reward their competencies and you want to keep those competencies strong and available. So how do we change the script? Well, we want to start supporting independent behaviors. Wow, that's great you did that yourself. But we also have to make time for purely social visits. Think of ways to spend quality time with an elder separate from caregiving tasks. That way, the person isn't only being attended to when they're dependent, they're being attended to when they're independent. And that's going to motivate them to do more, to be able to join in on those interesting, fun activities with family and friends.